aflevering 52. In this Power Talk, I will interview inspiring and successful entrepreneurs, opinion leaders, best-selling authors and other people who make a difference in this world. Download my free ebook now, in which I share the 7 habits of successful entrepreneurs with you. Go to JANNEKE to download the ebook right away. His one thing is writing. He writes a lot of books, the millionaire real estate investor, and also he's the author of The One Thing, the surprising simple truth behind extraordinary results. He wrote the book together with Gary Keller. The One Thing has been translated into 27 languages. Jay spent about 5 years researching and reading for this book. The One Thing was a bestseller on the Wall Street Journal, New York Times and USA Today. The One Thing delivers extraordinary results. Listen to this podcast will change your life forever. I managed to invite none other than Jay Papasan. Welcome to my podcast, Jay.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. In this podcast, I always look to the perils of success. I think you find out one of those perils. Could you explain the model of The One Thing?
Sure. I mean, the book could have been in the self-help section of the bookstore, but we wrote it primarily for business people and especially owners. That's when my co-author, Gary Keller, is trying to solve a problem. That's always the perspective that he comes from. And so one of the things that is so challenging for an entrepreneur is when you're starting a business, and in that long period, we've seen it take, on average, around 8.5 years, for a real true foundation for growth to be built. People often see companies late and think it happened overnight, but the entrepreneur was working for a long time to create that successful business. The entrepreneur has to wear many hats. If they don't have an accountant, they are the accountant. If they don't have someone to answer calls, they are that person to answer the calls. If they don't have someone to do sales, they are that person. And so identifying who you are at any given moment of the day is perilous, to use your language. And so one of the best things that we could do for people with this book who are entrepreneurs is help them understand that there is a primary role for the entrepreneur, and they need to be conscious of when they're wearing that hat, how often they're wearing that hat, so that the health of the company, the growth of the company will always be secure, because all things don't matter equally. We're very, very clear about that, and we can go into detail in our discussion if we want about that. But there's always one thing that's going to drive the business, and as the owner, you have to own that. Whether you're doing it or not doesn't matter. You may be succeeding through an employee, but you don't take your foot off that pedal. You are always paying attention to it. It is truly the number one driver, and you're just relentless. So that's the goal of the book, is to help entrepreneurs identify that in their business, in their daily lives, so that even though they still have to do all that other stuff, right, some of it doesn't go away. If they do their one thing, then those other things, some of them become unnecessary, some of them become a lot easier, and sometimes they'll earn the right to pay other people to do them.
First, I thought when I saw for the first time your book that you only have to do one thing, but then I wrote something about the dominoes. Maybe you can explain about that story. It's a nice thing in the Netherlands, is what I found out in the book.
Oh, yes. Well, it was funny. When we were sharing the book with, we got to go to Book Expo in New York, where all the publishers debut their next book. And we were talking to all the buyers for Amazon and all the big book chains. And they're like, one thing? It's never just one thing, right? I mean, that's the first objection that busy people have, is like, are you kidding me? Who gets to do one thing? And we understand that. I mean, the goal of the book is to help people understand that at any given moment, you can only do one thing, and you need to be aware of what that is. And so we came up with the metaphor of dominoes. So hopefully you and all of your listeners at some point in your life have lined up dominoes. And if you line them up just right, when you knock over the first one, what happens, Janneke?
Yeah, then it's falling down. And it's
right,
and the other one is falling down, and the other one, and the other one, and the other one.
Exactly. And so, there's technically there's no limit to how far you could take this. So one of the calls to action, and when we teach the book, when we coach to the book, and in the book is line up your dominoes. And so when you identify the first domino, your one thing, and you align things properly, you can find the domino that knocks over the most. And we were just playing around with we had 2 full-time researchers in the 5-year period that we were working on the book. And one of them found that the world record, right, for dominoes was actually set, and I'm going to horribly mispronounce this, Leeuwarden in the Netherlands. Is that even close to the right?
Leeuwarden. It's almost good.
There we go. Thank you for the But there's a group there in 2009 that set the world record, and they lined up almost 4.5 million dominoes. And by knocking over one, they got them all to fall down. So our first aha was, if you use this approach properly, one thing can make many things happen. And then we stumbled on to another piece of research, which to me was in some ways more significant, is that the guy named Lauren Whitehead wrote in the American Journal of Physics that a domino could actually knock over another domino that was 50% larger. So a 2-inch domino could knock over a 3-inch domino, could knock over a 4.5-inch domino. And I'm an English-French major, so my math breaks down there. But you get the point, right? Yes. It gets bigger and bigger. And he built them out of wood for the magazine article. And, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 dominoes into it, a 2-inch domino could knock over a domino by progressively knocking over one 50% larger that was almost 6'5" feet tall, like as tall as a door. Wow. And what began with a gentle tick ended with a large slam. And one of the illustrations we have in the book is I went into my computer immediately and got out Excel and graphed it out. Like if you start with a 2-inch domino, like how big does that get and how fast does it get? And this is the page that I have a 12-year-old and an 11-year-old. This is the page that they like. But if you took that progression out, a domino getting 50% larger, by the 18th domino, that 2-inch domino would have built up so much momentum, it would knock over a domino as tall as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. By the 23rd, it would knock over one as tall as the Eiffel Tower.
Yes.
And by the 31st, it would be 3,000 feet or 1,000 meters higher than Everest. And then by the 57th, it would reach one almost all the way to the moon. And when you look at that, it's like a hockey stick on its side. It's called a geometric progression. And our big aha, because I was just playing, and Gary's like, well, that's the shape of success. It feels like nothing's happening, but you're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing, and you're doing the right thing. And then you look up, and your success happens so fast, it actually is kind of terrifying. It can happen and grow faster than most people expect. And that's usually the feedback loop that I encourage people when they're trying to live this book to get to the place where there's a curve. If you're on a diet, if you've ever done that, the first week or two, you feel like you're losing ground and you're just miserable. And then about 3 or 4 weeks into it, someone goes, wow, you look really nice. You've lost some weight. And that's where that feedback loop starts kicking in, and the rewards will keep you going. And in a business, it can take a long time. You have to have vision and faith and keep doing your one thing, and that's where the business can explode, right? So Hopefully that's where you were wanting me to go, but align your dominoes, line them up so that by doing your one thing, you can get many, many multiples of actions.
You tried this model for yourself as well. Could you tell the story about that?
Oh, gosh. Well, it depends on which context you're talking. Is there a specific context that you want me to go in? Because I've been living this in every area of my life for almost 8 years now.
Now maybe about your own company.
Well, one of the stories that we tell is one year Gary met with his top executives, and they were trying to figure out how to make Keller Williams. When I joined the company, we were relatively small. We had about 6,700 partners in the business. And today, just to give people perspective of how far we've gone in 16 years, we're the largest in the world with 150,000.
Wow. And
one of the goals he had early on is how can we make our book fashionable to the top people in our industry? And they put up, got a whiteboard, and they put sticky notes on it, and they came up with almost 100 ideas. And one of them was to write a book about the highest levels of success. And that is something, that's how I began working with Gary. We wrote a book called The Millionaire Real Estate Agent. And that book is now sold over 1 million copies and has been a huge component of opening doors for our growth. And so you ask the question, you identify the thing that you think will give you the most leverage, that will have the biggest impact. And, we invested 90 days in writing that book and a year really in supporting its growth. And then you look at what has come from that effort. It was a massive lever, right? It was a huge contributor to our growth and the success of the company.
Great. What means success for you?
I love that question. And we pondered that. Like, if this book is about extraordinary success, how are we defining success? Is it monetary? Is it about your career growth? Is it about happiness? And the most fundamental definition we could come up with for success is that success is getting what you want. And here's the rub. Most people aren't really clear about what they want. Yeah. And so that's almost always the first step. So where do you want to go with this? What do you want to have happen? And they just have a vague notion. Well, I just want to start my own business. Well, great. Now, where is it going? What do you want it to be? What does success look like for you? And the moment people get clear about that, then and only then can they work backwards to identify their one thing.
That's cool. I think it's a couple of weeks ago. I spoke with Cameron Harold, and he writes a vivid vision. So he writes a vision for himself, but then he writes it the story for his company. Is it already exists? So then he has a really clear vision what is happening the coming 3 years. So that's that's also really fun.
Well, I mean, I'll play off that. I mean, that's a great question. Like 3 years, and in the book we kind of advocate, you're having a someday goal, which is way out there, and then working backwards to what would have to happen in 5 years for you to be on track for that, and you keep going back. Yeah. But the reality is, 5 years is forever in our technology-driven world.
Yeah, that's true.
But you still have to do it. And you have to understand that it's a moving target. But if you look at Elon Musk and you look at Jeff Bezos and some of the giants of industry, they have a pretty massive vision for what they want to accomplish. And, Elon Musk, honestly, it all boils down to, he just wants to go to Mars, right? All of this is so he can go to Mars. And they've got this crazy vision, and they're working backwards to make it happen. And it's a moving target. And I think a lot of people feel like, well, if it's going to change on me, what's the point? On the journey, you're going to change too. And as you grow, and because you're pointing towards an outcome, and even if it's wiggling around or moving a little bit, more than likely you're making progress, a lot of progress towards what it's going to be, because you're paying attention. You've got a compass for your business and your life. And so I just think I'll acknowledge the rapidity of change. Thank you, technology, for transforming our lives. I love it. It disrupts us as well. But it's not something that should stop people from doing that process of, I do need to decide where I think I'm going. I'll acknowledge that it may change along the journey. But if I don't know where I'm going, any path will do, right?
Yeah, that's true. Did you remember what you want to be as a child?
That was something that I thought for a while I was going to be an engineer because my dad was an engineer. I thought that I would be a lawyer or a journalist or a professor, but it took me until probably I was my early 30s to really acknowledge what I'd been doing all along. I wanted to be a writer. I tried to write my first book when I was 12. I always was reading books. My first jobs were in bookstores. I got a publishing degree. I worked in publishing. It's funny. If anybody had been a dispassionate observer in my life, they would have made that observation really quickly. But because I didn't have this book to help me or a mentor like my partner, Gary Keller, I was just kind of always doing the next thing. I didn't have that vision. But looking backwards, it was all just the handwriting was on the wall the entire time. So it did take me a while to figure it out, but I'm very clear about it now that I love to create things, especially when it comes to books and words, and that when I'm doing that, I can make my biggest contribution to our businesses, and I'm also my happiest.
Yeah, great. Could you maybe share a bit about your vision for the coming years?
Sure. I'm super blessed in that my wife is also an entrepreneur. She runs a very large real estate business that's in 3 states now and growing. And as we had children, we had 2 children, 16 months apart, and we
busy.
Yeah, I know. It was not planned. That part wasn't planned, but it was we happily accepted what we got. And so the first few years were really tough, obviously. And then, we have businesses. I'm also an employee in the company I work for. I have my businesses on the side, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are doing that as well, trying to balance out those 2 worlds. So we had to get really proactive. So we actually started this 9 years ago, before the book was written, and then we adopted the methodologies of the book. But usually in November or December, we will book an overnight babysitter, and we will go spend the night in the cheapest hotel we can find that's okay. We don't leave town. We just go downtown or right here in Austin, and we'll go to dinner that night and talk about what do we want to accomplish next year. And then the next day, we'll sit in the hotel room, order breakfast and coffee, or maybe go to a restaurant, get our laptops out, and we'll really try to define where we're going. So the framework we have now, and it's funny, I've literally got it in front of me, is we have our 5-year goals based on where we want to be with our family and our businesses. And we spend a full day, at least a full day, every year getting on the same page. So when you ask that question of me, it's not, well, I think I'm going to do this year. We have a lot of very precise things, and I know, what's at the forefront. For our publishing business, our number one thing right now is we're trying to rewrite our first book, which is a 1 million copy bestseller, which is, in my 20 years in publishing, I've never had to edit or rewrite something that was already so successful. So you're trying to make it better without messing it up.
Was it the book about?
Number one.
Was it the
I'm
book?
sorry.
Sorry. Was it the book about a real estate, a millionaire real estate investor, or another book?
It was the first book was The Millionaire Real Estate Agent,
Agent.
which was about being running a sales business. The second book was The Investor.
Okay.
So the book about being an agent was our first, and we're rewriting it, and that's the professional challenge before me this year. We also have investing goals and family goals, and we could go down those paths, but I'm pretty clear that I need to have that manuscript done by June, and I'm working backwards from that target so that we can publish it by the end of the year or in early 2018.
Maybe some listeners think about, how do you set goals?
Sure. Our process for setting goals, it's funny, I asked Gary one day, I said, does it bother you if you don't hit your goals? And he said, no, the only reason we set goals is to determine what we do today. And so as soon as I figure out what my activities have to be to hit the goal, I usually just raise the goal and increase the activities. And so any chance he has at hitting a goal, he just raises it before he gets there so he can test out how much he can do. So to give you an example, there's a section of the book we call Goal Setting to the Now, and I've already hinted at it. As a business, let's say you want to be the number one company in your category in your hometown. And so, so what would we have to accomplish in our business? What's the one thing we would have to accomplish in 5 years to absolutely feel like we would be on pace to do that? Well, you write that down. And then you work backwards one more time. Well, what would we have to accomplish this year in order to absolutely be on track for that 5-year goal? And again, it's just one outcome. And it's crazy. When you narrow your focus to one, people are uncannily accurate. They might be a little off, but they're not as off as you might think. And they'll say, well, great. Well, by the end of this year, we would have to have achieved this to feel like we were on track. Well, great. well, what would I have to do this month to feel like I was on track for my annual goal? And then you come back to the week. What do I have to do this week to be on track for the month? And what do I have to do today to be on track for my week? So we set those big goals. We work on our 5-year, and then we come up with a 1-year business plan with our clear number one priority. And we feel like if we hit that, we're on track. And so you distill it down usually to an activity. For most entrepreneurs, by the way, that's going to be sales. It's going to be marketing. If they just had more customers, pretty much everything else is going to be easier or necessary, right? They have more customers, they can hire people to service them. They have more customers, they have more revenue. I mean, it always comes down to that for almost every business. Sometimes it's about building the product to sell to them is their one thing. I get it. But product-based or service-based, there's usually a clear number one that you should be giving the majority of your time and focus to so that you can work on it. And then the simple act for me is I have on one piece of paper my annual goals, my monthly goals, and my weekly goals, right? So I break it down every month and every week so I'm really clear about where I need to be going. And then I look at my calendar and just ask the question, do I have enough time allocated to this core activity? So, the subtitle of the book is The Surprisingly Simple Truth. It is a very simple system, but it's not complicated is the point. I don't believe, and Gary doesn't believe, people can do complicated for very long. It's very attractive, but it's very hard to execute. But simple doesn't mean it's easy either, right? Because that means you have to say no to other stuff.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to have some brush fires that kick up and just let them burn, because you know that it's more important that you do this main activity, and you just have to trust that those things will take care of themselves, or you'll get to them when you've done your one thing. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. I think quite a big problem for some entrepreneurs is to make good choices. How do you do that? To make good choices?
Well, at the heart of the book, we have a question that Gary crafted through years and years of coaching and consulting with top business people. And we call it the focusing question. And it's worded like this. What's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? And it's one thing, not two or three. It's what you can do, not could, would, or should do, right? It's what you can do already today. And that second half, such that by doing it, everything is easier or necessary, just means it can't be a single domino. You're looking for something that's inherently leveraged, that by doing it, you're going to get many multiples of your return. And every industry has that thing. Like I said, most entrepreneurs, that one thing for their business is going to have something to do with marketing and sales, because that's where usually everything stems from that. You can have the best product in the world, but if you don't sell it, you're going out of business, right?
Yeah.
So you look for that, and in my experience, and I've taught this to thousands of people, when people ask that question, they almost already always know the answer, and they probably feel a little guilty about not spending more time on it, but they're so busy. We're so busy today. I mean, it's a product of our lives. If you're of the age of being an entrepreneur, you may have kids, you may have aging parents, you have all these responsibilities and obligations to go on top of the opportunity we're trying to build. We just don't stop long enough to ask the question. So one of the fundamental things we wanted people to do, if there was only one thing that they did as a result of reading this book, would to be to ask that focusing question as a habit. To begin their day, to begin their week, to begin their month, to begin their year. What's the one thing I can do? And to trust that answer and to try to allocate as much time as possible to that so that you can really advance that cause.
Is it still writing for you, your one thing, or is it changed? Is it more changed through marketing?
The answer is yes. And the challenge for me is that as the person, I'm responsible for our publishing companies. And the role of an author to write a book is three things. You have to research it, then you have to write it, and those are both about putting new product out so that you always have something every few years to keep your audience engaged and move forward. Well, there's a third part to that. you also have to market the book.
Yeah.
So we generally will go through a long phase of research. The writing phase usually doesn't last more than a year. It's just the amount of preparation we do to write is really the determinant there of how quality the writing is. And then there's a certain period of time where you have to promote the book. And the one thing has now been out 3 years, and the last 2 years, the sales have gone up 60% year over year. And I'm still chasing that. I'd be completely, I am talking to you as something that I have dedicated time in advance for. I have time blocked this as a priority because ultimately the success of our operation dictates that that happen at some level. So the most challenging time for me is when I'm actively still helping promote sales for a work while I'm trying to write and research. And it's the tension to those two things that it does sometimes I fail. There are days that I don't get any reading, researching, or writing done because I was promoting. Maybe I'm traveling to teach. And I just try to set goals, and I have a coach hold me accountable so that I will lose some ground on the writing. Then, I'm human. Nobody's a machine. We all are that way. But I try not to lose complete focus and lose all momentum. So that's the reality. My one thing has 3 phases, and that third phase can make the first 2 very, very tough.
Great. I would like to know you a little bit better. What drives you to do what you do?
We wrote about this in the book, how the biggest, most impactful businesses, under everything else, there's often purpose, that there's a mission, not just to make profits, right? It's not about money. They're usually trying to accomplish something that would not just benefit the owners, but everyone. And I think it's important that everybody kind of figure out what their ultimate motivator is. For me, it happened, I thought it was just about what I love to do. And I love to write. I love to solve problems. I love to puzzle out complicated things. That's all part of the writing process, which is why I love it. But why I do it is another question. And I think that I got clear about that a few years ago. I was working on a project for our company. It was a book I did not have any inherent interest in writing. And I was telling my wife about my battle plan. I was basically going to interview an authority and pretty much let his viewpoint drive the whole book. And my wife, she's an entrepreneur, and she's one tough cookie. She holds me accountable, and I love her for this. But this was a very tough statement. I told her my plan, and she said, it sounds a little bit like you're about to mail it in, right? Mail it in, meaning not give your best effort. And, you tell me and you tell your kids that you're a writer. Are you sure you want to do that? And I was like, whoa. I mean, it was...
Dang.
like, come on, give me a break. I'm having a bad day here. But what I realized in that moment, and the gift of that moment, was I got really clear. The thought of disappointing her and losing her respect was huge to me. It was far more important than whether or not I liked this book. And the thought of setting a horrible example for my children, right? I tell them to give their best, right? Whatever it is you choose to do, just go do it, that, and be really good at it. Be as good as you can be. I cannot be a hypocrite there. And so, at the top of my goal sheet it's sitting right here in front of me, the very first line is be the best husband and father I can be. Because I understand that underlying everything, that's my inherent motivation. It's not about the money. It's not about bestseller lists. It's not, those are all great. Don't get me wrong. I want those things to happen. But why I do them is different. And so I know that's a little cheesy. It certainly doesn't have to be anyone else's motivation. That's the point. Go ask the question, why am I working so hard? Why is this business so important that I'm willing to sacrifice so much? And if you can get clear on that thing and the cost of not achieving it, so the cost for me was to lose the respect of my family. And there is nothing I won't do to protect that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, really.
So that's why I have it written down, so I don't forget it. So on the rainy day when I don't want to do the work and I don't feel good, it's there staring me in the face. I have to confront it and go, you know what? I have to try. I can't just mail it in because there's more at stake than this book or this project. And that helps keep me motivated. And I think the best business people and the best businesses have that underlying kind of mission statement that's inherently unique to them, right? It's not competitive. It's not about being cool. It's not about something you want to tattoo on your forearm. It's just very, very personal, and it's very specific. And the cost is the thing I would encourage people. If you think about failing at that mission statement for you personally or your business, you should get a little teary-eyed. There should be a pain in your chest, or maybe you haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, that's true. One of the other questions I always ask in this podcast is, what kind of habits are essential for you to be successful? Well, we spoke quite a lot about the one thing, but are there other habits for you that are really essential to be successful?
Sure. I think that we talked a little bit about this in concept, this idea of time blocking, and it's when you know your goal, you go to your calendar and you block regular time so that you can do that activity. And our research, we looked hard, like how long does it take to form a habit? Like if you know what your one thing is and you're going to do it every day, you might as well try to make it a habit so it just is automatic, right? It's like brushing your teeth. You don't have to think about it.
Yeah, it's a really long time. 66 days or not?
Yeah. Most books that I had read, it said 21 days, but we couldn't find any actual scientific basis for that. They were just all quoting each other. So it's 66 days on average. And, a question I've heard Gary ask, what's the average temperature today in Europe, right, or America? And people will kind of be puzzled, and maybe they'll get out their phone to Google it, and you're like, well, who cares, right? I mean, average is average. I want to know what the temperature is here so I know what to wear. And so when you say 66 days, the reality is it's longer than most people get it, and it's going to be unique to you and the task that you're presented with. When we looked at the raw data the scientists provided, some people formed a habit in as little as 18 days, and other people took more than 250 days. So the point is, the 66-day challenge is, you stick to it until you feel like, you know what, I got this in the bag. This is automatic, and then you add to it. So you can't see my office, but on the door, I printed out a free calendar from our website, and we have a 66-day challenge, and I made it through 66 days of meditating for 3 minutes a morning. And I started really small, right, because I was failing, and I finally said, all right, I'm going to do 3 minutes a day. Well, I got to the end of 66 days, and it was still a struggle for me. There were days that I forgot to do it in the morning, and I had to do it when I got home. So I'm now 91 days, and I still don't feel like it's a habit. And I'm just going to keep at it until it works. And so there's a glimpse into my life, which is I figure out what are the key activities that are going to be the biggest contributors to my wealth, my happiness, my family, and over time, one at a time, I try to implement them as habits. So some of the other habits, and if you listen, I think you shared this when we were chatting beforehand. I listened to Tim Ferriss too. I love his question, what does your morning look like? In my experience, really successful people, they have a great day before noon, and a lot of them have a great day before 8 a.m. They wake up early, they work out, they eat a good breakfast, they meditate, they journal. It's the miracle morning stuff. But they're getting their essentials done before the rest of the world can interfere. And so for me, 3 days a week, my wife and I work out with a trainer at 5:30 a.m., and the other 2 days of the week, I read. I get up every day, and we have a healthy breakfast. I have a little family time, and I meditate. And over the years, if you ask me this question again in 3 years, there may be another activity. Oh, we also make our bed every day. That's one of those weird habits. I saw a speech by a guy named Chancellor McRaven at the University of Texas. He gave the commencement speech, and he talked about being a Navy SEAL. And he said one of their disciplines was they made their bed every day and they made it to military precision, because at the end of the day, no matter how horrible it was, they could say, at least I did this one thing well. And I thought about that, and I thought, wow, that's, I never cared about making my bed. My mom got on to me for it, but I was like, who cares? That's busy work. And we started doing it, and I would tell you, it is surprising how 1 minute of your day, straightening a few sheets and putting your pillows, could change your mindset about your day. So there's little habits like that I'm probably not even aware of that we've implemented, and I generally try to do things, and I try to get my wife to do them with me, because I know that if she's supporting me, the chances are that I'll succeed are that much higher. But that's just a glimpse at a few of them. I try to read 50 books a year. I usually don't make it, but I'm trying to average one a week, basically, and I usually get somewhere around 45 to 49. I've yet to hit 50, but as a writer, if I'm not reading, I'm not growing. So, there's fundamental things that I've kind of figured out, and I have reading time and that sort of thing. Does that help give you kind of a glimpse at some of the habits that I've tried to do?
For sure. And behind your own books, what books do you recommend to the listeners?
I have a little bookshelf of books that I give away regularly. And they're books that I give depending on the situation. So if it's not too much, I'll name a couple. There's a book that I've given away for the last 2 years called The Defining Decade by Dr. Meg Jay. And it's really a book about the decade between the age of 25 and 35 and how important the decisions are that you make at that period of life. And I read it so I could be a better uncle to my nieces and a better boss to some of my younger employees. And I found it to be wonderfully wise and beneficial. So when I'm in the presence of a young person, they may not take advice from me, but I'll hand them a copy of that book and say, maybe you should read this. So maybe your readers, if they're between 25 and 35, would enjoy that. Or if they have someone in their life, a child or an employee, that they would like to be a better mentor to, they might want to read it for that purpose as well. So that's The Defining Decade. And the other probably number one book is a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Oh, yeah, so you know that one. It's Battling the Resistance, right? It's, most of success is just a grind. It's doing something relatively simple and repetitive day in and day out for a very long period of time. And if you're willing to just keep coming back and doing it, to fight through the boredom and the distraction, success is on the other side. And that's a great book at describing that journey and helping people put words to it doesn't matter if you're a writer or an entrepreneur. I've found that battling the resistance, it's an effective kind of call to action for people.
Cool. I have one more questions. What will you recommend the listeners to do after this podcast?
Well, we kind of talked about it. So you got entrepreneurs, and maybe there are people that are also career people. If you're not really clear about what your one thing is as a professional, and for the entrepreneurs, there's the one thing that for your business, and then there's your number one role in the business. So let's talk about your job. Everyone has a job. Even the owner has a primary job. If you aren't clear about that, I would really recommend people take a few minutes and think about it and put down, what would be the top 5 things I think it is, and can I prioritize those? And at the very least, start testing it out. I've never seen anyone have a list of more than about 3 or 4 things. They can narrow it down. If they don't know absolutely what it is, then go talk to your boss. Go talk to your partners. Say, I think this is the number one thing I should, every day I should give this some attention. Do you agree? Doesn't mean those other things aren't important and maybe not even vital, but when you know what the number one domino is, that should be the first thing you do every day. Just knock it out and feel virtuous the rest of the day. So that would be my advice. Identify that one thing and try to put it at the very front of your day. So you come into the office, you get your coffee, and you open your laptop, and you just dive right in and see where that doesn't take you. Even if it's just for a few minutes, I believe, and I've seen a lot of evidence to persuade me, that simple prioritization of your one thing and tackling it at the beginning of the day will will over time be enormous contributor to your success.
Cool. Where can people find more information about you? And then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. The website for the book is theonething.com, and that's with the number 1. And we've got free resources. I mentioned the calendar, the 66-day challenge. That's on there. We've got a little worksheet for helping people figure out what their purpose is and to do goal setting. So there's lots of free resources. And, I've got one of those weird last names. So if you Google me, you can find me on social media and reach out.
Great. Thank you very much to have you on my podcast.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for helping us spread the word.
In de volgende aflevering spreek ik met een dame. Zij wordt door de Next Women en door Opzij wordt zij gezien als de dame die in de top 10 staat van de meest invloedrijke vrouwen op het gebied van ondernemerschap in Nederland. Ik spreek met niemand minder dan Hetty van E. Zij is CEO van Ormit en het is een heel erg gaaf gesprek geworden. Ik kan niet wachten om dit met jullie te gaan delen. Graag inspireer ik jou om van dromen naar doen te gaan.